surface.
Very good, the ocean. So, looking at the Earth's surface, water makes up about 70% of the surface of the Earth. But when we're looking at mass, it makes less than 5% of the mass of the Earth. Because water is really dense, it doesn't have that much weight compared to the landforms that we have. So, even though water exceeds in quantity, this covering the surface of the earth in mass, it is very minimal compared to landforms. So now, continuing, what do we call the process by which water is circulated? Anybody knows?
Is it not evaporation?
I didn't hear you clearly, Darnell.
It is not evaporation.
When we say water is circulated, we mean not like in the, like you have the streams that have flowed. We're not talking about that kind of circulation. When I mean circulation, it's in the environment in general. So if I have water in an ocean, how is that circulated so that can go to the atmosphere and then come back to land or to the ocean? What do we call the process of
The
that
water
circulation?
cycle.
Very good, the water cycle. So that is the circulation. That is the main process that occurs in the environment that circulates water throughout the environment in a whole. Next question. Okay, let's talk about the water cycle and then we'll go to the other question. The water cycle, the main component of the water cycle is water. And the circulation that happens in the water cycle causes water to be changed through three different phases: solids, liquids, and gas. And all of these conversions happen in just one process, right? The water cycle shows the continuous movement of water within the earth and the atmosphere. It is a very complex system. And even though you might probably only think that we have evaporation, condensation, precipitation, the water cycle encompasses much more than just those. Okay, I have already accepted her in the class. And as I was saying, evaporation, condensation, precipitation are basically the three stages, the three processes that happen into the water in the water cycle that you are most familiar with. What we want to do today is we want to go into the complexity and every single detail that happens in between evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. All right? So, the water cycle is basically this. You have evaporation, which is where the water itself turns into a gas and moves into the atmosphere. You have condensation, where the water particles in the atmosphere condense and then they form clouds. And then you have precipitation, where those clouds release the mass liquid of water that they have in them, and that falls down to the surface of the earth. Collection is all of that precipitation, all of that precipitate that has fallen to this land or the ocean, that is just collected again and it runs back into its original place in the ocean. All right, so basically this is what you guys know and what you should know about the water cycle. My next question is, what is another term used to refer to the water cycle? Anybody knows another name, a more scientific name that is given to the water cycle? Has anybody heard of another name given to the water cycle? No? Let's continue and then we'll see. Okay. Water circulates between the sea, the atmosphere, and the land. Water may flow on the Earth's surface, and that could happen either on the surface of the Earth or it could happen underneath through the soils and through the rocks. Water can also flow into rivers, and that leads them up into the sea. The pattern of circulation is known as the water cycle, but it is also called the hydrological cycle. And that is the correct scientific term to refer to the water cycle, the hydrological cycle. Now, talking about the water cycle and the transportation and the transference of water in the water cycle, we do have the sea and the land. Water is moved from those two places on the surface of the earth to the atmosphere by evaporation and by transpiration. Who can tell me what the difference is between evaporation and transpiration? Has anybody heard of the word transpiration? Nobody has an idea of what that is? Okay. Evaporation, and I'm gonna just type it in the chat. Evaporation is when water evaporates from where?
From the sea.
From the sea. Okay, from the sea. Transpiration also has to do with the evaporation of water. But from where do you think? If evaporation is from the sea, where does transpiration come from?
From the plant.
From the plants. Very good, Kylie. From the plants. From the plants, from the trees, from the grass. That is where evaporated water comes from for transpiration. So now that is another term that we're adding to the water cycle. We already knew what evaporation was, right? When water is evaporated from sea or from any water source, from any water body. Now the correct term for the evaporated water from the land is called transpiration because it comes from plants, it comes from trees, it comes from grass, from the soil, from everything that is any water that is on the surface of land. That is what we call transpiration. And then we continue. The atmosphere to the land and sea. So now that evaporation has happened, transpiration has happened, and these two things happen together, right? From the surface of the earth going to the atmosphere. Now we have precipitation so we have condensation that happens there, but we don't really want to focus on the condensation because that is just the water particles forming clouds. We want to concentrate on the precipitation. After it has gone up, how does it come down? And here I have rain and snow, but we also have hail, which are ice chunks that fall from the sky. So we have rain, snow, and hail that could be examples of precipitation, how the water in the atmosphere falls down to the earth. And let me go to the image so that you guys could see clearly instead of just looking at the words right here. And I have quite a lot of words in this image, and we're going to talk about each one of them. So I have evaporation right here. Evaporation from the sea, from the ocean. I also have evaporation from lagoons, from ponds, from lakes, any water body, any body of water, evaporation happens there. I have transpiration right here from the trees. If you have noticed, sometimes leaves does have some water droplets on the leaves. That is transpiration. When that happens, that same little water particles that are on leaves and on trees, that is transpirated into the atmosphere. So we have evaporation and transpiration. Now, condensation, and I have condensation right here, is when all of these things that are evaporated and transpirated come together and they form clouds. They condense themselves and form clouds. So every single cloud that you see in the sky is just a big, huge bubble of water that is floating there. And when that cloud has reached its mass point, meaning that it is filled with water particles that it has absorbed as it floats around in the atmosphere, then it lets go all of what it is holding in the form of rain. For example, for us, it is rain. In other parts of the world, it could be snow. In other parts, it could be hail. It all depends on our geographical location, how precipitation is presented in our form. All right. Now, everything else that I have here, I have sublimation, transportation, runoff, infiltration, percolation, plant uptake, groundwater runoff. These are all important things that happen during a water cycle. And all of these things might be minor. For example, the main things, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, that is the main thing that happens in the water cycle. But after precipitation, we have quite a lot of things that happen. For example, let's look at deposition right here. And deposition is talking about this little steep that I have here. And this is a mountain, a snow mountain. Mountain that is in an area that is exposed to a lot of snow. When snow falls down to the surface of the earth, does it melt automatically? If you've watched movies, or if you've watched things like that, or if you've seen it in real life, if the snow falls from the sky and lands on the ground, does it automatically melt? No. If you've seen the movies, and I've only seen snow in movies, when the snow falls, it falls one layer, another layer, another layer, and it builds up, and you have these big bulks of snow that are on the surface of the earth or wherever it may fall. So these bulks are called deposition, and that applies for water as well. When you guys, okay, here in Belize, we have a lot of potholes in the streets. When rain falls, and it falls into that hole, does it automatically get sucked by the ground, or does it settle there and create a puddle? It creates a puddle, and that is what we call deposition, where something just settles there and stays there, and it could stay there permanently, or it could stay there for some time and then move on. All right. In the case of snow, if we have places that constantly have snow, then we have, for example, mountains. And for example, if you have seen pictures of Everest mountain or those mountains in the Himalayas, those mountains get taller and taller because you have constant snow that is happening there. If you have places where there is constant rain, those places are exposed to flooding because after some time the soil cannot suck down all of that water that is being thrown down at it. All right, so deposition can stay there permanently or it can be there temporarily. Let's look at infiltration, and I'm just gonna talk about some of them, not all of them, because this is not what we want to concentrate on today. Infiltration, right here at the bottom, you have infiltration, percolation, plant uptake, and groundwater. Infiltration is basically when water or rain falls to the surface of the earth, then some of it automatically gets taken in by the soil, and that is what we call infiltration, right? And depending on what kind of soil is in that area, then that determines how much water the soil is going to intake. Who can tell me what kind of soil best absorbs water? Anybody knows? You have sand, you have clay.
Since the black soil is,
The black soil. Okay, here in Belize we mostly have black soil. Black soil is like in between. If you water falls in an area and if you have sand, then you can try this. You put sand in a cup and you poke some little holes at the bottom of that cup and you throw water in there. That water is gonna go right through the sand and might take some sand with it. If I do that with black soil, some of the water stays in the soil and some of it will fall out. If you have flowers and plants and then you pour that into a flower pot, some of it comes out and some of it gets sucked in by the soil. If you do that with clay, you pour water in clay, and I'm not talking about the Play-Doh, I'm talking about clay, the type of soil. If you do that, then all of that water gets held there. It doesn't pass through. So infiltration happens depending, or how good it happens depending on the type of soil that a specific area has. Here in Belize, where we are, most of our land is the black soil. Some areas do have white soil, but most of it is black soil, and our infiltration is in a medium pace because we can, depending if we have not had rain or if you watered your yard or whatever, then all of that plays a factor in how well infiltration will occur in that portion of land. If there has not been rain, or if you have not thrown water on your backyard or a piece of land and you do that, automatically everything will be sucked in because there is no water in the soil. If you are somebody that constantly waters your yard, or there is constant rain and you do that, it might take a little longer for the water to get infiltrated by the soil. Plant uptake is what it says there. It is the water that is taken up by the plants, the water that is absorbed by the roots of the plant. And groundwater, if you are from a village and you have seen a well leads to groundwater. Groundwater is an area under the ground where after it rains, water is collected and water stays there. And wells are created in areas where the rocks around it are non-permeable, meaning that the water does not seep lower than that. If you have seen a well, you know that water gets collected in that well. And at some point at the bottom of that well, water can no longer be dragged down because you have reached to rock or to soil that no longer absorbs water. So it's just collected there. So groundwater is water that is under the ground. All right? Anybody has any questions? Let's see. Let's move on to our other topic. What are the main processes in rivers? And your second assignment is based on this topic. Now, what we are doing right now is we have rivers in Belize, we have rivers in Central America, and we have rivers in the Caribbean. And we basically want to talk about how river shapes are formed and what happens in the transition and in the movement of a river that causes certain things, or for a river to look in a certain manner. So we're going to talk about three main processes.